Thank you very much for having us today. Yes, we're from the Saskatchewan Information Library Services Consortium, or as we like to call it, SILS. SILS is a province-wide consortium, basically. So it's one province, one library card, one ILS, and so SILS manages the ILS as well as a lot of the regional library websites in the province. So we do have 7 regional library systems, 2 urban public libraries, Northern Library, which you can see is the upper half of the province there, and then the provincial library, which is part of the Saskatchewan government. Altogether, that's 11 agencies, as we usually refer to them, and over 300 branches in the province. Basically, there's a lot of small towns in Saskatchewan, and most of those small towns have libraries. So we migrated to a new ILS a couple years ago in 2015, and obviously with a consortium of this size, with this many branches, where people can place holds on anything in the province, people are really interested in where their stuff goes. So who's placing holds on my stuff? Are my patrons placing holds on stuff from other people's libraries? All these questions that come up. So reporting is a really important thing for us, and we have some members who are who like to make data-driven decisions. They're very evidence-based in that way. And so what we found with our ILS reporting tools, first of all, one of the reasons why we changed ILSs is to have better access to our data. And we certainly do with the ILS we moved to. We're now on the Polaris ILS, which is really custom built in a way for public library consortia. We can customize our reports to a great deal because it uses SQL Server reporting services as its reporting backbone. But overall, they're just kind of boring. People get their Excel sheets every month sent to them by email, and it works fantastic. It's very smooth and fantastic. But at the end of the day, it's numbers in a spreadsheet. So I can't say we were really looking for anything, but obviously, who wants to look at boring spreadsheets all the time? There's a lot better tools out there. And so this kind of happened as a side project off the just out of conversation. Scott's going to talk a bit about that and how we approach this kind of side project here.
Thanks, Dale. So I was browsing Hacker News one day, one of my favorite tech news sites, and we noticed that some clever folks were turning their boring firewall logs into some pretty neat visualizations and dashboards. And so I showed it to Dale, and he kind of just said, why don't we try the exact same thing they're doing with our ILS reporting data? And so that's just kind of how this project started, just off the side of our desk. So we're going to talk today about the software we ended up using, the same software these people were using to visualize their firewall logs. It's called the Elastic Stack. It refers to 3 free and open source software projects, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Elasticsearch, many of you are probably familiar with or maybe have worked with before. It's a data storage and search index. Logstash is a data broker, so it collects data from sources and sends it off to destinations. In our case, we're executing a SQL query against the Polaris database and sending that information into Elasticsearch, indexing it into this search engine. So Kibana sits in front of this stuff and provides a web app for visualizing the data in Elasticsearch, creating dashboards, and executing searches against the Elasticsearch data. So the Elastic Stack is free, as I mentioned. It's licensed under the Apache 2.0 license. It's used in a lot of places for many interesting things. If you're familiar with some other products like Tableau, Google Data Studio, Amazon QuickSight, Microsoft Power BI, it's kind of in the same idea, dashboards, visualizations, maybe getting a little bit more of your data. So for the more technical folks in the crowd, here's a kind of simplified infrastructure or data flow diagram. You can see Logstash in the top there, executes queries against the Polaris database, ships it off to Elasticsearch, and Kibana just talks to Elasticsearch to store its configuration and make dashboards. Maybe if you're familiar with D3.js or like the kind of web visualization stuff, you could think of Kibana as D3.js with the Elasticsearch as its data source. We put the application behind Nginx and Active Directory so that our staff can authenticate using the same username and password they do to get into the ILS, and also so that we can give permission only to those staff who should have access to this tool to do so. So the question you might ask is, what data are we putting in Elasticsearch for us to analyze? And it's the same kind of boring data that we use in most of our reports, actually. But specifically, it's from the circulation transactions database that Polaris has. And in our instance, we consider transactions to be checkouts, renewals, and holds placed. And so what we do is we look at those transactions as they happen and aggregate as much kind of data about that transaction when it occurred as we can. So things like when it occurred, where it occurred, basic non-identifying details about the patron that made the transaction, and as much detail as we can about that individual material that was transacted at that point in time. So you know, you can't see the fields there, they're kind of small, I'm sorry, but this is an example document that's indexed into Elasticsearch for us to be able to search and analyze. If you're familiar with them, they're just a collection of fields and values. So there's things like title, author, call number, the patron's home agency, things like that. So for us, each of these is considered a transaction. And all of these documents can be searched in their entirety or on an individual field-by-field basis. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Kibana process that we kind of just learned and discovered naturally. It's a 3-step process. Discover the data, visualize it, and then put it into a dashboard. So the first step, discover, we found was actually quite powerful. We were we were interested in this for the pretty visualizations and the dashboards, but this discover process is actually incredibly useful and neat. So here's what the first instance, when you log into Kibana, this is what it looks like. It's a search engine, really. You get a preview, results preview, a histogram of results that are returned, a date picker, just like the time frame you're looking at in the top right, and in the top left, a number of results returned. So in this case, we're looking at a month of data, and there's 711,000 transactions that we're able to search through here in this month. So if you're familiar with Elasticsearch, you might be familiar with the Lucene query syntax. It gives you a lot of different options for searching these fields that we have available. So full text, the word or phrase, you know, you're probably familiar with full text, exact value, regular expressions. There's fancier things like Levenshtein distance, proximity, range searching, etc. And the really powerful thing about this Lucene query syntax in this scenario is that you can combine any of these search strategies into a single query and search one field full text, search another field for exact value, and use a regular expression in another. So that becomes quite useful. So after you've searched through your data and determined what you're interested in, and you've used the Discover tab to ensure that you're looking at what you think you're looking at, you can visualize it. So Kibana provides some fairly standard visualization options, pie charts, area charts, heat maps, things you're probably already used to. I'm just going to flip through some examples. Here's some vertical bar charts, some tasteful pie charts, a line chart. That one is actually our average time to fill holds, I believe, over time. So that's kind of cool. This is a stacked area chart or graph. The mapping facilities are not so standard and not found in more of the standard tools, and our members really seem to like them. Here's a more exotic kind of graph. It's just a line chart with the lines hidden and the dot size representing the number of transactions completed by individual patrons. The color of the dot is the agency that they're from, so red is Saskatoon, blue is Regina, yellow is Wheatland. This is a morning in the SILS Consortium, so you can see the consortium kind of waking up, and maybe Regina patrons are a little bit more active first thing in the morning, but then Saskatoon, you know, takes off. So the next step after you've created some of these visualizations in Kibana is to create a dashboard. And really all a dashboard is just a collection of visualizations all brought together on one page. So here's some examples. Here's a map with some bar charts. The bar chart on the bottom left is a percentage chart on the kinds of cards used by people at the various branches in Regina. So I think the red is child cards and the blue is adult cards. The vertical bar chart on the right there is materials split by collection, I believe. So here's some of the ones you saw in the other slides. This one's, Dale might talk a little bit about this. So here's just a quick animation. I'm sorry it's too quick and it's hard to see, but hopefully you get the idea. All of these visualizations, every element of them you can click on it. And when you do, it limits the entire dashboard to whatever you've clicked on. So in this case, I think that pie chart I'm clicking on, show me only transactions that were completed by self-check. And so the numbers go from 300 patrons that morning to 7. 7 patrons used self-checks, and they were at that single branch, and those are the materials that they checked out, that kind of idea. So Dale's just going to talk quickly about some of the staff impressions, how they've received this tool, and what they've found it useful for.
All right. So first of all, within our office, we found it very helpful when producing reports for our directors to say what is going on with things in the province. So we often have concerns about who is sending more materials to other people and whether there's reciprocity happening between different agencies in the province. And for the most part, that does happen, and it's fairly equal. But everyone in the consortium wants to be a good citizen as well. So being able to, we asked a few of our members about some of the insights they've gained from looking at the data, and certainly they said being able to get a firm handle on what kind of materials their patrons are placing requests on. And certainly if for example, one agency's patrons are placing tons of requests on Westerns and they're all having to be filled by another agency, that means they need to bulk up their Western collection and make sure those are being filled locally and save on shipping and all sorts of things. Because we do actually end up shipping about 700,000 items a year around the province. And in the most case, those are legitimate in that there's one or two copies that a couple places own, and so it's the long tail of items. But we want to make sure if it's a popular item or one that's owned within in that place that patron is getting it. So it also helped. One of the agencies reported back about this. It helps when they present this data to staff as well. So in this case, this frontline staff thought that holds were the be-all, end-all. And that's partially because they spent a lot of time filling holds, pulling books off of shelves, putting them on shelves, putting them in bins. And when they were presented with kind of overall graphs of circulation data, it was really easy for them to see intuitively that was only about 20% of overall activity. And what was actually interesting is that 80% of the people visiting their branches were just walking in and picking things off the shelf. So making sure you have adequate browsing collections is important. And this is just comparing the dashboards versus the traditional Excel reports, and it's certainly a complement. We use both, but it is just that intuitiveness where you can see a trend line going one way or the other. Because Elastic Stack is agnostic, ILS agnostic as it were, we can aggregate a whole bunch of other data as well. So we have added overdrive data. We've had discussions about adding computer use and door counts and program usage. But that's kind of up to the member libraries to ask us about that. And a couple more things. GIS, there's the mapping capability built right in. One of our agencies used to export the data and map it in a separate software, but this is totally adequate enough for what they need to do there. Just want to speak quickly. So we find it incredibly helpful, perhaps even more so than our members, but we do traditional IT things, such as analysis of IIS logs and monitoring our system use. We have, did that just turn off? There we go. Okay, so we can actually keep track of our web-based circulation client and see points when it's unresponsive. And quickly, there's an Achilles heel in our ILS, and we can reboot that service, and everything keeps on ticking. But this allows us to keep track of when that Achilles heel, what's the term, been breached, I guess. We do Apache logs from all the websites that we run, and then we also have Elastalerts via Slack. So if a response time on something is too slow, ping, we all get a message in our Slack channel as well as on our phones. And so it's just another alerting system in addition to other monitoring systems that we have in place. One final use, we monitor our API use, and because we use the Polaris API quite a bit for our custom search interface. We've got some basic code up on GitHub. Elastic Stack's pretty easy to set up, and I think we're about out of time. Yeah, okay. Time for questions? Okay.
Hi. You were mentioning you were monitoring the API. What kind of stuff were you monitoring, and how do you get the data out of it? I mean, you like requests, you're going through the logs, or?
It's log parsing, right? Yeah. It's all IIS logs that are being parsed. And so we have the endpoints that are being hit and the type of requests. It's all grok parse then?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
regular expressions pull out the endpoints.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's regular expressions that we parse out, and then we have all that information there put into graphs and everything. So, and that's a more traditional IT use of this tool. So, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.